Tom's told you the caveat many times already, so we'll kind of go by that one. Urban BMP verification and the Bay pollution diet, and this kind of sums up the whole mess right here. BMP verification became a priority for all of the source sectors. This was not just a urban problem. All of the various source sectors had to develop a verification and tracking and reporting system. The urban work group actually spent about 8 months discussing this very subject here at every single meeting. It was, the conversations ranged from why are we even bothering doing this to the exact opposite of trying to be very detailed and very exacting. But we ended up coming to a consensus after about 8 months. The states were probably going to implement this through their MS4 reporting efforts. And the reason why I say probably is because we really don't know where this is going yet. There was, as I mentioned earlier today, a whole series of middle management and upper management panels that were going to take this information from the source sectors and try to figure out how they were going to implement it. It's kind of been held up a little bit now simply because the states are looking at these and saying, oh my God, this is going to cost us a lot of resources that we currently don't have. Well, we at the local government stage have been saying that for a long period of time, but it really didn't sink in until the states figured out it's going to cost them resources. The verification principles were based upon, well, let me backtrack. We were, all of the source sector work groups were asked to put together these verification principles and protocols based on 3 basic principles. The very first principle was reporting. Any practice that was being asked to achieve a credit in the Bay model, you had to be able to report it in some form or fashion. The second principle was scientific rigor. What you were asking for in terms of a credit for a nutrient or a sediment had to be backed up by science. As I said earlier, the day where we could just hand a half-page memo to the Bay modeler saying we want the credit for this is long since gone. These reports now are on the orders of 50, 60, 70, 80 pages long. There's a lot of science behind this stuff now. And the third was instilling public confidence. Now that is one area where I would have to say the urban sector has had a bit of a problem. We haven't had a lot of confidence on urban BMPs simply because they're a lot more visible than anything else. People see them. They see them all the time. They see the trash inside the dry ponds. They see the gutters lined with trash. So confidence has been a bit of an issue on the urban sector side. The one thing the urban work group, or a couple of things that they realized was that no matter how we put this together, the verification was going to have to operate in 2 separate, distinctly different worlds. One was regulated stormwater, and the second one was unregulated stormwater. And both of those are driven completely different no matter what state you're in. The other aspect to this is the ability to verify is also going to be linked very closely to whether or not a community has an MS4 permit. It's safe to say that tracking systems and reporting systems have been around for a number of decades. Wastewater has been tracking and reporting forever. The non-point source side, tracking has only been around for the last several years. So they're safe to say that there are a number of tweaks that are going to have to occur to those systems that are currently in place, or completely redesigning systems where they're not in place whatsoever right now. Verification has to work around several different types of BMPs. We have the traditionally engineered facilities such as wet ponds and dry ponds. We now have to introduce verification to those runoff reduction BMPs. In addition to that, we have to figure out how we're going to handle non-structural BMPs or operational BMPs. And thirdly, and lastly, we had to figure out how we were going to handle retrofits and restorations. Each BMP has some very unique qualifications to it, which makes it very difficult to come up with a set of practices that one size fits all. Whether you're talking about urban nutrient management, whether you're talking about street sweeping or stream restoration, they're all very different. And that's why in each expert panel report now, there's always a section on tracking and reporting and verification. We know that these are major hurdles to overcome. We also know that another major hurdle that we have to overcome is going to be the MS4 systems. There's going to be a lot of emphasis on those jurisdictions that have permits, because that's the hammer that's available to EPA in the states. As I said earlier, we also know that we have limited staff resources. This takes a lot of effort. The key of the entire urban, one of the two keys to the entire urban verification principle was that it was going to utilize the existing MS4 framework. We didn't want to come up and redevelop something completely new. The existing framework system is there. There are certain tracking and reporting requirements that already exist within the MS4 permit requirements. So we're going to utilize those. Ongoing BMP reporting and maintenance inspection requirements may need to be tweaked a little bit. As we talked about earlier again today, some of the states have a 3-year cycle, some of the states have a 5-year cycle. So there's a little bit of tweaking that's going to have to occur there. It all centers around, though, one key subject area: maintenance. Maintenance is the entire key to BMP performance. And it all starts off with the initial verification of a BMP installation. We've all seen it before. For those of you who are involved in BMPs on a daily basis, a system gets put in the ground and it's wrong from day one. Those systems have to be identified at the get-go. There is no way that you're going to be able to get a pollution credit for a system that floods up the very first time it rains and doesn't drain out. The initial verification is going to have to be either by the locality that's involved in the project, the engineer that's involved in the project. There is someone that is going to have to take responsibility for that initial installation. Then the localities are going to have to report that through their MS4 program. Maintenance, again, as we just talked about, regular inspections, depending upon whether you're looking at a 3-year time frame or your 5-year time frame, the core principle is still going to be maintenance. Local record keeping. This is something that, when we talk about being expensive, it pays off in the long run. Prior to this point in time, for those MS4s that had relatively weak permits, you didn't really have to sit down and do an annual reporting of this to this degree in this nature. It's only been within the last 5, 6, 7 years that jurisdictions are starting to look at their own localities very hard to find out how many systems that they have. Fairfax County just started, about 5, 6, 7 years ago, looking at their inventory. And they're still finding BMPs to this day that they didn't realize existed. Local record keeping is going to be a key. Tying this into GIS systems is going to be a must. Eventually, the model, I suspect, what we're dealing with now is not going to be the same model that we're going to be dealing with in 2020. Probably, hopefully, at that point in time, it won't be a lump parameter-based model. It'll be more of a distributed model. But we'll see. We're looking at 2 different cycles. We're going to have to look at several different cycles of verification and inspection. You're going to have your annual inspection that's going to be required by your permit, and then you're going to have that second inspection to verify that the BMP is actually truly functioning as it was originally designed to remove nutrients. A lot of this is going to center around that visual inspection, and that is something that we're still working on. The Center for Watershed Protection has put out a visual inspection document several years ago. That's going to kind of form the cornerstone to what we're looking at. Again, the basic concept is that the urban BMPs will have a defined time frame. You've seen that already today. through the expert panels that were presented. one BMP will have a defined time frame of 5 years. Another BMP may have a defined time frame of 10 years. During that period of time, you will receive that credit for that removal. But that's the caveat. The caveat to that is that you perform that visual inspection. If you don't perform that visual inspection, there's a new whole process that's going to be involved in here, and that's BMP downgrades. And that downgrade basically says that if you don't follow the inspection process, you don't keep that facility up to par, you're eventually going to remove the BMP credit that normally would be available to you. I will say that downgrades is still extremely controversial. There are a number of states that say, there's 1 or 2 states that are basically saying this is not going to fly in any of the verifications that get passed on. So we're not quite sure where this is going to go yet. That kind of centered around the MS4 jurisdictions. What about the non-MS4 jurisdictions? Well, we came up with a series of 4 options for the non-MS4 jurisdictions. And basically, the first option was that, you just basically followed what the MS4 folks had to do. The second option is you're looking at a subset. A locality could come in and look at a subset of their BMPs at an 80% confidence level and be able to get the same credit that the MS4 jurisdiction could receive. The third option would be for a third party to come in and do that subsampling and submit that to the jurisdiction, who would then submit it to the states. And the third party was really brought in there for those tiny jurisdictions that only have 1 or 2 people in the shop that does the entire 9 yards. We needed to find something to give them some relief, and that's why the third party option is available. The fourth option was also available, and the fourth option is essentially a do-nothing option. And what that means is if you have a jurisdiction that does not have a maintenance program, that does not do the reporting, is not willing to do the tracking, once a facility is put in the ground, you will get that first 5-year lifespan of a full BMP credit. But then after that, the system downgrades by 20% over the next 5 years. So it slowly goes away and is slowly removed off of the tracking systems. One other thing that's hanging out there is the legacy BMP cleanup. There are a couple of things that were put up on the slide here. I will also say that this is something that's being discussed right now through the Watershed Technical Work Group. There are a lot of questions and a lot of arguments that are occurring right now as to how do we handle those facilities that were already in the model and they're already being reported. What's the process for getting them off it, or how do we recredit those BMPs? So there's a lot that's happening in those regards.